This video is the third one in the series on Munchausen syndrome. If you haven't seen the other two, you might want to watch those first, because this is a follow-on from those two, and in response to some of the questions that I've had. Now, I've got to be honest, I wasn't expecting the reaction that I've actually had since I put up those two videos. I thought Munchausen's would be a very small minority interest, and actually it stirred up quite a big response. So thank you for everyone that's written to me. I've had various people message me from Reddit, lots of comments on the previous videos as well, which is fantastic, and some of the questions that have been either emailed over to me or there's been a couple of calls as well. Just to let you know, coming up, I've got somebody who tells me they have Munchausen's, or they are Munchausen's. I don't know if it's something you actually have. It's more something that people do. We're going to do an interview on the channel. I'm going to anonymise, obviously, the person involved, ask them a few questions, get them to explain a few things, and hopefully we can shed some light on some of the motivations and reasons why people do this behaviour. Because there's been such an interest, and I have to say it is a personal interest of mine, especially when I worked clinically in a hospital. I was more than happy to take those patients on myself and to do the work with them. Other staff don't really like to, and I quite enjoy that kind of stuff, so they were quite happy to pass them to me, and I could pass them some of the patients with conditions that I didn't find interesting myself. So it all worked out well. Now I've started going through some of the more up-to-date literature, because my clinical experience of working with Munchausen's is over 20 years ago. So I had a lot of experience 20 years ago, but that is still a long time ago. So I thought, okay, it's time to get updated. So I've just ordered up some books. I've got this one, Trust Betrayed. It's by Jan Horwath and Brian Lawson. This came recommended, so that looks very good. I've got another one which is Munchausen Syndrome by Proxy, and Current Issues in Assessment, Treatment and Research. And this is by Imperial College Press, and it's edited by Gwen Ashhead and Deborah Brooke. That looks also very, very good, I have to say. And this one, while I was in my little searching around on eBay, I came across this one, which is Sickened by Julie Gregory. And it's the true story of a lost childhood, and it's basically from somebody who's now an adult who was subjected to Munchausen by proxy via a parent. I haven't actually looked into this at all. It just came up on the list as I was searching for this subject. It was a couple of quid on eBay, so I thought, right, we'll get that one. So I'm going to start working through more of the up-to-date literature too, and we'll produce more videos on Munchausen's. Now, to the question that I want to do in this particular video, I'm just going to cut across to the other page here so I can see it. Now, this is from Alex. This was a question that was posted as initially as a challenge to some of the claims that I was making in the first video that I did. And then I answered very briefly, but of course, medium of text and short answer, not really good enough answer. So I said what I'd do is I would now make a longer form video to address some of the issues that are raised. I'm going to read the question virtually in full. It's on the YouTube channel, so you can see the question in full if you want to. How do you assess and how can you tell fakers from basically non-fakers? And how do you avoid medical discrimination with this particular outlook? How did everyone you know in neurology, how do you know they were faking? One of the things I said was, I spent a weekend shift on a neurological unit. I think it was an 18 bedded, I can't remember now, 18 or 24 beds. Every single patient was a faker, every single one of them. And that's a bold claim to make. And of course, well, how do I know that? How do I possibly know that? So it's a good question. Now, just because scans didn't show up anything, or because there wasn't any hard proof, so how come? Most neurological disorders start without anything showing up on imaging. I'm just worried sending this message that the majority of people in ER are malingerers is hyperbolic and dangerous. I'm in the States, so maybe it's different since we have a terrible healthcare system, but people die all the time because doctors dismissing them, and like I said, it happens mostly to marginalized people. Even if they are getting treatment, studies show that many doctors believe, unconsciously or otherwise, that black people don't feel pain as much and thus are under-medicated and considered overreacting. What is your criteria based on medical and scientific evidence-based data that you use to show everyone in the ER is mostly faking? Obviously, the woman who lies about the overdoses is, but I'm curious about the neurology and especially how do you know? So, at no point have I said everyone was faking. What I did say was it is massively underestimated by the lay population. People that work in clinical settings will be well aware of the kind of levels of incidence, but that this presents, how many fakers you actually see. It is a massive number. People think it's going to be really, really rare. I used to see them every single working day. And as I said in the other video, at any one time, you've always got at least one in the department. So if we just deal with the A&E situation, so accident and emergency, or ER to you Americans out there, how do we know they're faking? Well, there's a number of indicators. Most of them, in the early days of presentation, you don't know they're faking. They slip through the system. And because most of them will go undetected. The ones we know to be fakers, and this is the bit that's so concerning, we had 800 known fakers. How many people were slipping through that we didn't know about? Okay, so that just think, now how do we know they're fakers? Well, there's a number of markers. One is you see them once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day, every single day, constantly. You're looking at characteristics of behavior. Today, they're in having swallowed razor blades. Tomorrow, they're in having overdosed. The next day, they've swallowed razor blades and had a convulsion. And on and on and on. And the characteristic behaviors of them are way different to what you see with anyone else. You can weigh, probably an unprofessional thing to admit. We had a league table, not in this particular department I'm thinking of, but in another department, we had a league table. There were 2, actually. One was sufferer of the week, who had been kept waiting the longest to be admitted to the ward. Awful with the understaffing and under resourcing of hospitals. Some patients are waiting an insane amount of time in a corridor of accident and emergency when they should be on a ward somewhere receiving proper care. And some people have a ridiculously long wait. And so we used to have a thing each week, who had waited the longest. Awful, but black humour of staff. And the other one was, whose medical file weighed the most? Literally, you can weigh the people's notes. And the winner in this particular department, I think it was 9 kilograms. 9 kilograms medical file. That wasn't the entirety. That was one aspect of it. The rest had been moved into long stay storage because there were like 10 files, each weighing 9 to 10 kilograms each. It was the frequency of attendance and the weird, endless, hysterical presentation. Swallowed razor blades, that kind of stuff. Stuck pins in myself. Injected poo into my veins of my leg. That kind of stuff. So I'm sorry, you've admitted you've come to hospital because you've injected poo into the veins of your leg. Yeah. Okay. And some people actually do that behavior. So these are the markers that tell you, okay, this is not quite someone who's been in an accident. This is not someone who's having a heart attack. This is somebody who, oh yeah, we know them extremely well because we see them every day, single day, sometimes several times a day. So those are the classic markers. Now, in neurology, this is where it's a massive problem. And this is why in the healthcare system itself, it is a massive problem. Because we don't dismiss patients. Just because we say, oh, we know there are Munchausens, it doesn't go, right, you're Munchausens, get out, go home. It doesn't happen. We bring them in and we treat them as though what they're telling us is true. Because that is how it's done. That is how professionals help. Now, think about how many people are faking and how many resources are being consumed by these people. And they know how to maximize attention and how to maximize resources, believe me. And the endless manipulations they have. They'll be doing the same at the police station, with the social worker, with the housing department, and every public service agency that they're in contact with, and they'll be in contact with every single one of them. They're repeating the same behaviors. It is a massive resource drain on really high attention-seeking individuals who clearly are not getting the help they actually need. That's the primary issue here. So we can't dismiss them. So they do get the attention that they demand, and that therein lies the issue for the establishment. Now, in neurology, there are some absolutely stereotypical behaviors that you'll see. Now, a lot of people who have these weird esoteric neurological signs and symptoms, the moment you go to test them, there aren't any. And yet very clearly, they seem to have a coherent history. The map of the body, the neurological map of the body, is so well established. You can tell very, very quickly whether what's being reported follows known neurological pathways or doesn't, as the case may be. And in which case, when it doesn't, you're now looking for other agency that's causing it. Is it psychosomatic? Is it a stress response? Is it that kind of stuff? When it consistently doesn't follow known neurological patterns, you then may well have a consideration, okay, are they faking it? But you need to look in the context of other behaviours and clinical history too. So no one leaps to the conclusion at first presentation, oh, they're faking it. It's when they've been in the system for 15 years and you see the piles and piles of notes and the records from the nursing staff, the medical staff, from based on the conversations and the behaviours the client has demonstrated, you can start to piece together a picture. So it's not something, oh, you've got neurological syndrome, you're faking it, mate. You're Munchausen's. That's not how it works. It is a very, very lengthy process of observation. But a lot of these patients hospital hop. They move around the country to different hospitals. In the UK, hospital treatment is free to UK citizens. So they don't have to pay anything. There's no financial penalty to them. So they're free to move around and do these things. But there are some patterns that you'll see. So whether it concords with known neurological patterns, that's a key area. For diagnosis, for is this a physiological disorder? Is it another medium? Is it being mediated through other mechanisms? Then you're going to start to look at how does the person behave around diagnostics? So some people have weird types of seizures, and it's very hard to ascertain what's really going on with them as a seizure. So a classic thing on a neurological unit will be what's called video telemetry. So the patient has EEG contraptions. The technology now is probably so much better than it used to be. So they had these weird things stuck on the head and a battery pack and all the rest. And in various key places around the ward, usually over their bed or pointed at them from the bed, often it's 2 cameras. There are cameras recording the whole time that are connected to the EEG. Now, after 24 hours, the EEG recording is sent off for analysis, and the machine skims through looking for epileptiform brain activity. We get time markers on those things. Where the time markers come up, you then look at the video footage for what was the patient doing at the point where the epileptiform activity is happening. Now, sometimes they'll be convulsing, but not always, you see. That's the weird thing. We had a guy on one neurological unit. He was a great character, really good, great sense of humour, really charismatic, a lot of fun to have as a patient. And he had lots of weird things happening, and he couldn't explain what was going on. And every now and again, he'd sidle up to the nurse's desk, and he'd start kind of like, "Yeah, darling, you all right? How's it happening over here?" And he'd start flirting. He would just start flirting. It's like, okay, all right, now you want to go back to your bed now. It's a bit odd behaviour, thank you. Well, after the video telemetry, what we discover is that behaviour, as he starts walking over, on the EEG, epileptiform activity. So we know that there is an organic thing happening in his brain that directs that particular weird flirtatious behaviour. Somebody else used to just burst into song. That was quite an odd one. Just a few lines of song. Again, video telemetry demonstrated there's underlying epileptiform stuff going on there. So it's not breaking through into convulsions in this typical sense. So that's a classic thing. Now, quite often in that 24-hour period, nothing is found. And this is where it can get very frustrating for the patient because they have to keep coming in and out of clinic. They're sent home with various assessment tools and whatever to try and capture actually what is happening here. They may have MRI scans, there may be CT scans and various other neurological scanning type things that are done. Here's one of the problems you have with some patients. They actively convulse in front of you on a regular basis. You think, I've seen a lot of seizures in my time. This one doesn't look like the others, but there's lots of variety. And every time you try and get an assessment done, every time you try and get them to the scanner, you can't. They always convulse just before the scanning. If they're going to have an MRI scan, you can never get the MRI scan done because they always have a convulsion just before the machine starts, that kind of stuff. And yet whenever you put on the EEG, the 24-hour stuff, nothing ever happens. Nothing happens. And so it is impossible to capture, even though whilst they're on the unit, they are constantly demonstrating these symptoms. It's just the symptoms are getting in the way of any attempt to do a diagnosis. And that's a very common manifestation that you see. Then you're going to start looking through, okay, let's pull up their full history. Oh, look, they injected poo into their leg on a regular basis, according to A&E. Oh, and they swallowed razor blades. Oh, and you see how the picture can start to develop where we go, okay, we get an idea of what's going on here. Another one is they can have a lovely 3 or 4 day stay in hospital and nothing ever shows up. Then upon discharge, they fit just as they leave the department, usually in the landing of the hallway or as they go down the stairs or in the hospital corridor, but never on the department, only upon discharge. That's not an uncommon thing as well that we would see. So there's lots of behaviours that are idiosyncratic, that are not patterned into the normal run-of-the-mill of what you would see. You see, these clinicians, the nurses, the doctors, the care assistants, all across all the system, this is what they do every single day. After a while, you start to see the characteristics of certain disorders, certain personalities, certain behaviours. Some of the fakers slip through because they're very, very convincing, but others are... people start to detect, okay, there's a pattern here that is not characteristic of what we would normally see with patients like this. So a lot of it is based on experience, and then gathering history, gathering clinical data, gathering multiple reports from multiple sources, because everyone's writing up notes the whole time. They go into the patient file and those kind of things. Sometimes it may take years for the clinical picture to emerge where it becomes obvious because the patient is so skilled at masking it. So just to recap, no one is saying that all patients attending A&E or all patients in neurology are faking it. But a disproportionate number of fakers will end up in neurology because neurological syndromes are the easiest to fake. And also, neurological syndromes are often the hardest to diagnose as well. So it's the perfect hiding ground for people. Here's the other one. A lot of patients with esoterically weird neurological syndromes, they get subjected to an insane number of tests in trying to find out what the hell's going on with these people. What do we do to help them? What intervention and treatments use? Because often these are very rare syndromes that no clinician in that unit has ever seen before. The internet, of course, has made communication between clinicians so much easier. Because of that, is also ideal for a lot of patients to go to because they can get the attention and get the intervention from multidisciplinary teams when they end up in that department. So it's really, neurology is the holy grail for the Munchausen's patient, which is why you can end up with so many congregating in those departments. With those patients on that particular weekend where everyone was known to be Munchausen's, do we refuse to investigate? Do we refuse to treat them? Do we refuse to care for them? Refuse to feed them? No, none of that ever happens. That's the problem. We don't confront them, we don't challenge them, we don't do anything. We treat them as genuine patients. And that's why they are so draining on the system. As always, if anyone's got any additional thoughts, comments, questions, any other book recommendations or literature, research, that kind of stuff, I'm very familiar with Mark Feldman's work. Mostly, I was a bit of a fan of his, actually, back in the day, just to share this. Because of the work I was doing in accident and emergency when I was young with Munchausen's, I became a little bit of a sort of, not an expert, but a bit of an expert. I confronted a patient on the neurological unit, and that patient freaked out, and I ended up in a whole load of trouble, and I was actually suspended from the unit. And I thought, oh, okay, this may not be the way to go. So I asked for help, and I contacted Dr. Feldman. I'd already read the books he'd written up until that time, and he gave me some superb advice, which I followed to the letter, and it worked beautifully, and it dealt with the situation. The situation was resolved, for me at least, professionally. And things moved on quite well from there. So as a result of that, I recognized there is an expert. So I'm familiar with Feldman's work. If there's any other experts in this area that you can recommend, stick them in the comment section, because I'm going to do more videos on this subject.